Hi, welcome back to our conversation on the book of James. My name is Danielle Jones, and I'm one of the pastors here at Wayzata Community Church. And this is Rustin Comer, who is now at St. Matthew in Walnut Creek, California. So we are going to talk about part 2 of chapter 3 today. This is just 5 verses 13 through 18. And Rustin's going to start us off by reading.
Awesome. Thanks, Danielle. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace, reap a harvest of righteousness. It's not a good one.
It is so good. It's interesting. I mean, to me, it feels like there's 2 parts. There's the part of, I think it's interesting that James sets up envy and selfishness against wisdom.
Yeah. Well, you know what I would say about the book of James. Sorry, I'm getting my charging cord as we talk. Part of what I think that's fascinating about James is I really do think James is about, to use Paul's metaphor, it's about becoming a meat-eating Christian. Right?
Yes.
Like James is talking to people who have been in their faith for a while, that they've lived out this journey, they've been following Jesus, and they need to grow deeper, that their confirmation faith that they got when they were 12 is no longer enough. And James is calling the question on all of those pieces.
Yeah.
Right? So he's like, yeah, when you were a young Christian, you probably used to say really mean and hurtful things. Now we're maturing. There's a higher expectation.
Yeah.
Live into it. And I think, and so this is, he starts putting in this conversation about wisdom and selfishness, right? Like we're all selfish when we're little. You think about who's the most selfish reality in the world. It's a toddler. Like, so how do you move out of the selfishness into something that's deeper?
That's right. Well, and if we remember that the first part of this chapter was this, exhortation to teachers and really James saying, don't teach. If you can help it, don't teach. So this seems like the follow-up to that, okay, if you are going to teach, if you are going to be someone who's a meat-eating follower of God, then this is how it should look. What does wisdom look like to you, Rustin?
Yeah, I think as a person, I've talked about my grandfather a lot, and both of them. So Jack and Walter were 2 of the wisest people I know, like in very different ways. Like my grandpa Walter, what we called Papa, was like a Marine from Iwo Jima, World War II, saw the worst things you can possibly imagine, came back. I honestly don't, until I was 17, I don't remember my grandfather ever even speaking a word to me. He was just quiet. And then at 17, he started talking more, and then my grandmother passed, and then he was like a chatterbox from that point on.
Wow.
But when he spoke, you wanted to listen because he didn't waste words. And growing up in the Depression too, like if he found something on the ground, he picked it up, right? And like frequently that something would be used for somebody else. Like he just, like there was enough life. I think wisdom comes with age, right? I do believe there's old souls who have this deeper wisdom, but I do think there's just natural wisdom that comes from living life.
Yeah.
And so he did that. He was super faithful, he prayed. My grandfather built like 6 different churches. Like he was just super invested in his neighborhood and his community. And then my other grandfather, right? Like I think one of the things that he understood, and this is the difference between selfishness, right? Like Grandpa Jack understood that the world did not revolve around him, that it wasn't about him. And so he was not a selfish person. Like, and like when it came to like he was a big problem solver, like that was part of his mission work, was that, you know, he would be called in when there was trouble. And they called him in because it wasn't about him. And he knew that like part of what he did was help people understand, hey, this issue you're having in your church is because you're making it about you.
Yeah.
And it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. What we're here to do, the mission is bigger than that. I think that's a piece of wisdom, right? That people who are wise understand that the thing is not the thing.
Yeah. They're playing the long game a little bit. Yeah.
And the thing that like, right. So like most of the conflict I have in my life, the thing that I'm trying to address with my therapist, what I learned 3 or 4 months into my therapy is that thing is just the tentacle coming off of the real thing.
Yes.
I peel back the layers of that onion.
Yeah.
What I find out is like, oh wait, this goes back to my childhood, or this goes back to this unresolved issue, and this goes back, and that I just let linger and be there until it rooted out in me in ways of selfishness or a mess.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about for you? Like, who's somebody in your life that you deem wise?
Well, you know what? This is so interesting. So just yesterday, so I'm looking at this verse 17. Wisdom from above is pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits. And yesterday I took the morning to do a spiritual retreat for pastors. And one of the stories that was shared was this beautiful story about Thomas Merton. And unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the person who this happened to, but it was another kind of spiritual formation, spiritual director kind of person who had the chance to have Thomas Merton be his spiritual director when they were in the same monastery, when this man was about from 18 to 24. And so we talked about the first time he went to see Thomas Merton, who was this famous, Catholic theologian, spiritual director, deep soul. He's in awe that he's been assigned Thomas Merton as his director. And so he starts actually hyperventilating when he's in Merton's presence. And Thomas Merton's like, what's going on? And he's like, I have a lot of trauma in my past, and a lot of it's connected to my dad. And I'm scared to be with you because you're Thomas Merton and I want to do this right. And he said, what's the chore that you have been assigned here at the monastery? And he said, well, I'm supposed to take care of the pigs. And he said, okay, so in the afternoon, after you take care of the pigs, before we go to Vespers, I want you to come to my office and I want you to just share one thing with me that happened in the pig barn. And the guy was like, I can do that. And so that's how their relationship began. And as he tells the story, he says, of everything I learned from Merton, which was so much, he said, that was the most powerful to me because he companioned me and sat with me and was wise enough to see what was going on with me and to just not drive his agenda, willing to yield. You could imagine that Thomas Merton could have had this moment of like, I'm Thomas Merton. Like, if you are not on the fast track to leadership, I don't really have a lot of time to mess around with you if you're going to be hyperventilating in my sessions. And super powerful image to me where I just felt like, oh my gosh, that is what leadership looks like. That is what being wise looks like. That is what taming the tongue looks like. Thomas Merton didn't try to solve all the man's problems in that moment. He just said, let me listen to you about something that's easy for you to talk about in your daily life that matters to you. So that's what's sticking out to me today.
That's interesting. Yeah, I love the phrase you use. He was companioning me. Like,
yeah,
such a great phrase. Another person I think of that people at Wyzetta will know is Kristen Jaidi.
Yes.
I think about wisdom. I think about Kristen, and part of what I think about with Kristen is how slow everything is.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And Kristen, I hope you're watching this. I love you. When I first came to Wyzetta, like I was like, no, let's go, speed up, right? Like I want to move. I want to move quick and fast, and let's do this. And any decision that takes more than 24 hours to make is going to be a poor decision, in my opinion.
Take note of that, St. Matthew. Just kidding.
But part of what I've learned, right,
Mhm.
over the course of my journey there and over my course of my journey of faith is
Yeah.
like, no, like slow down, right? Like God's been in this room a lot longer than I have. God's been at St. Matthew longer than I ever, even before I even knew St. Matthew existed. He was at Wyzetta before Wyzetta Community Church ever tried to build its buildings,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
God's in the long game. Jump in the long game with God. Like
Yeah.
do the like what Kristen does with you is she unearths the solidity that is you when
Yep.
she's with you. She brings out the solid parts.
Yes.
And that, right, to me, that's that willing to yield, right? Like,
Gentle, peaceable. Kristen is so peaceable as well. Yep. And without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. I mean, I am the queen of partiality. I'll tell you that right now. Like, I for sure pick a winner and a loser in a situation, especially if I'm involved. and so, I mean, just such a good, deep calling, I think, that James gives us throughout this whole chapter to, you know, be careful when we're teaching and even say no if we have to, if we know we can't do it from the right spot, to tame our tongues, you know, to be careful, to know that envy and selfishness are sort of the flip side of wisdom, because of course, if wisdom is willing to yield, gentle and peaceable, envy and selfishness is all about deception, right? It's not about authenticity or really calling out what someone is doing or trying to say. It's about getting my own way.
yeah, if you want what someone else has, that's like, you got to stop,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, if that's the journey that you're on, is like the coveting of the other person's thing, you already know that you're on the opposite path of wisdom.
Well, and
Like,
maybe to your point, it sort of goes to what you shared about your therapist, that there is this, it's that time to stop yourself and ask a question, to say, what is under this? If I want what somebody else has, what is really going on inside of me? I worked for a pastor in my very earliest career, like 22, who he always would say, I swear, every staff meeting, he'd say, you know, the issue is not the issue. You know, if we were saying, oh my gosh, this person came into the church office and she was livid, and, you know, he'd say the issue is not the issue. And so to not only apply that to others, but to apply it to ourselves too, to say, if you're driving me crazy because your glasses are on that way, that's not about you. That's about me, right? So I've got to take a deeper look at what's going on. And that's wisdom.
it is wisdom. It really is. Like, and I, you know, I would say one of the challenges I would give for all of us is to take this verse 17 and 18 and spend an entire month just meditating on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy, full of good fruit, without partiality, without hypocrisy. This is the fruit of righteousness, right?
Yeah.
And all of that is only useful if it's sown in peace, right? That's that turn he makes right there, which I think is beautiful, right? Like, all of these fruits of righteousness are only useful when you sow them in peace for another person. So the moment that you use your purity and peacefulness and gentleness and you're willing to yield to manipulate somebody else, it no longer is a fruit of righteousness.
Well, then you're back in the envy and selfishness category.
Exactly.
You've just done it in a more subtle way.
Yeah.
So
thinking about how do we do, like, you know, pick one a week. Like, how am I going to be peaceable this week?
yeah. We should memorize this just like we do the love passage. You know, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast. I mean, we have those often, that passage memorized, but I want to memorize this passage because I think it would help me a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I have the fruit of the spirit memorized. Why not memorize this? I think it's a good, like, because then because we all, like, when you've been a Christian as long as you and I have, generally we feel it, right?
Yeah.
Like, when we're about to, like, be when we're about to be unyielding, I'll be nice. Generally, not always, right? Sometimes it sneaks up on us and it comes out like a lion, right? But generally we feel like something's off.
Yeah.
So, like, if this was a passage that we had at our disposal, right? Would we then be like, okay, yeah, like, let's pause for a second and ask ourselves, peaceful, gentle, willing to yield? Like, do we have the checkpoints in place for this to move forward? Okay.
Yes.
If so, let's go.
I might have to actually put this on the wall somewhere, like sort of do a chalkboard or some piece of art. Wouldn't that be good?
That would be good. You can put it right
Yeah.
underneath a really pretty bird behind me.
Behind you?
No, behind you.
Oh, I know. Isn't that a pretty bird? It
I,
is. And I like it with the plant as well. So thanks for pointing that out.
yeah, I like it. I like your new office. Thanks.
Well, so may we go into this week, into this day, I should say, really thinking about wisdom, and not only thinking about it, but trying to cultivate it in our own lives and in our own selves by looking at verse 17 and 18 and letting those be our guide. And maybe this would be a good sort of end of day review as well. So go in peace and serve the Lord. And thanks for joining us today.
Amen.